Hey guys, recently React Apollo came out with a new version 2.1 and they introduced some new components. So I wanted to take a look at them, show you how they work, and then give you some of my thoughts on what I think about them. So in this example, I'm going to be using a GraphQL server to make some requests, and the one I'll be using is this one right here. This is a simple one I made on Launchpad a few videos ago, and I'll have a link in the description below if you wanted to look at it. So I'm on Code Sandbox, and we're just going to take a look at how you would do it. First, a little refresher the old way without any of the new versions, and I have a really simple example here. I am fetching an ID and a name, and that's just showing some colors. So we don't even need to look at this. We're really just going to look at the code for now. Okay, so this is how you would do it with the old way. You would use this higher order component called GraphQL coming from React Apollo, and you would wrap your component. So my component is called colors. You'd wrap that with your query component. And what that would do is now in your props you have something called data. And you could rename this if you want, but the default is called data. And inside of data we have loading, which will tell us if it's loading the query. And then we also have colors, which actually gives us the data. So we can check if it's loading, and if we want we can return null, or maybe we return some kind of null, or not null, but a loading spinner or whatnot. And then once it's no longer loading, we actually have the data, and I'm just here mapping through the data and displaying, as you saw, two colors. But this should be all familiar with you if you've used React Apollo before. The new version now has this new component you use called query. Now, don't be worried, they didn't change it and break it, so you can still use this old component too. But if you want to use the new one, it's called query. This is using what's called a rendered prop. So notice I have my GraphQL query up here, but before we even dig into the return statement of colors, we notice we are not wrapping a higher order component anymore. That's gone. So these are equivalent. So the one I have a new query and this old, they're doing the exact same thing. So you can compare and contrast them. So we pass our query as a prop in to this query component, and then what it's going to return is actually a function. So this might look a little weird right here if you haven't seen it before. What this is a function, but it's wrapped inside of curly braces. So there's a curly brace there, curly brace there, and then here is just a regular function. This is basically a render function. And you'll notice there is two props here, loading and data. So this is very similar to what we had before, but you'll notice one difference right off the bat. I'm not sure why they didn't keep the same thing as they're doing with their higher order component, but they took loading outside. So loading is inside of data here, but in the new component, loading it's outside. So you do not grab loading outside inside of data anymore. So we can check again, do the same exact check to see if we're loading, and then I just do data.colors. So this colors is still inside of there, so this looks the exact same. But this is relatively intuitive and makes sense if you've used GraphQL before and GraphQL queries. This looks pretty familiar, and it's pretty easy to grasp how this works. You just pass your query in, and then you put inside of here basically a render function for it, and it's going to do the exact same thing. Again, I don't know why they added just an extra loading. So let's take a look at mutation. This one's actually a little interesting too. So they made them slightly different than the higher order component. Here is a mutation where I'm removing the first color. I imported mutation from React Apollo. I pass in my mutation, and then again I do curly braces, and this is a rendered prop, and then right here I have my function. So the first parameter is the mutation function, which is usual in how you would do it before. The higher order component would pass a mutate prop in, and here are two new things that you don't get with the higher order component: loading and error. So these are passed in as the second parameter, and so if I wanted to, I could check whether the mutation is loading, and if there's any errors I could display it. And you could return something prettier than this, but I'm just dumping the error. And then at the very bottom, here's just a button, and then I'm calling the mutation function. So this is a little weird though. You don't get loading and error when using a regular higher order component, but that's pretty nice. I actually like that. But note, loading is not going to be true right when the component mounts, right? It's going to be true whenever you call this mutation function. So that's going to be a little different than how loading works with query. So whenever that's actually making the network request, loading is going to be true. Okay, so a lot of people have been asking me what I think about these and whether I'm just going to be using the query and mutation component all the time anymore, and does this pretty much, you know, basically make this depreciate and like no one's going to use this GraphQL higher order component anymore. So I don't think that's the case at all, and I think there's a lot of times where it makes sense to use the higher order component actually over both of them. So let me show you an example of this. So let's say we want to do a mutation and a query in the same component, which is a very common thing to want to do. So here's how you might do it with a rendered prop, and there's not really a great way to do it. And maybe I'm doing this in the wrong manner, but this works, and I don't think there's anything that they, with the components that we currently have, that you can do better. So here I have mutation and query from React Apollo, and I'm basically just stacking them. So first I have my mutation component, and then I have my function for it, and again, same thing as I had before. I return null if I'm loading, have my error here, but notice now in the return statement of the mutation, I am now rendering a query. And inside of query, I do the same thing. I check if query is loading, I can return null, and then again, here's the very bottom where I return both the data I get from the query, and then also here's the button I can press to fire off the mutation. So you notice how you stack them like this. And you can see how ugly this would get really, really fast if you have a couple mutations you want, or a couple, just rendered props don't really stack very well. This gets really ugly and really hard to code. So contrast this with what it would look like if you did it the old way. And I find this way more readable, where you'd use the compose function coming from React Apollo, and you'd grab your GraphQL mutation and your GraphQL query, and you'd inject it into your component. And then we have mutate and the data props, just like that. And I think this is a lot easier to read and a lot easier to use. So when using multiple, I'm definitely going to jump to the GraphQL higher order component. And also, the higher order components are more composable. So what I mean by that is you can use it across multiple different components very easily. And I'm going to be getting more into that in the future and showing you how you might take advantage of that. But because of that, I actually really like the higher order component. I might use these like maybe just like a one-off where I just need to do a quick little mutation or a quick little query. I think these are great. They're really simple for, I think, just one-offs. If it's a very simple component, I would probably do it like this maybe. But honestly, I don't really think you need these two components too much. I don't think they add too much. Maybe they'll come up with some better uses for this, and I'm sure they're going to be developing these out more since these are brand new. And maybe there'll be some people that show some really good patterns that you can use these with that make them really strong and really good. Like, for example, these are really nice, having loading and error just in there for the mutation. So, and I actually like having the loading outside of data, because then I don't have to destructure it. It's a little weird, they just made some stuff different from the higher order component, but I like the direction they're going with it. So those are the things I like about them, and I'll be using them more and seeing how I feel. So those are my impressions just of the query and the mutation component, but there's actually some more components that have come out. The subscription component, and then I believe there's something called the Apollo Consumer. So I'm going to be going over those very soon as well, and let you guys know what I think about those. But I'm really happy and excited. Apollo is doing some very cool stuff with GraphQL lately. But that's it for this video, guys. Come give this a try. Come try out the new components. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And again, if you want to check out any of this code or the Launchpad, it'll be links in the description below.